Hi, everybody. I'm Frank Stanishi of Open Forum. Of course, it's always candid, it's frank, and of course, it's live. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV Sticks, Roku Sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now joining me on the program, Open Forum, is one, the only Stephen. It's not Stephen. I'm calling his. I just said his. Do I feel foolish?
No, Stephen Del Duca isn't on yet. He's next.
Jerry Levitan. No, we were just talking before the program. I apologize. I saw your last name and I said, I did some work for Levitan. I'm pretty sure his name was Stephen, and it's going way back, standing in his office watching the verdict on O.J. Simpson. So you're a lawyer as well. I don't know if we can start there.
Sure.
You are obviously running for MPP, of course, with the Ontario Liberals, and the place where you're running is a very, very interesting place, as usual, because it's in Toronto. It has a lot of cultural relevance.
Yeah, no, without question. It has the largest Portuguese community in Canada, a very strong Italian Canadian community, Vietnamese community, African community, and white community as well. So it's a very diverse riding, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, let's start with that. Your desire to be a politician, and then when we get into everything else, you've done everything. So now is that all that's left? How does that work?
Well, there's plenty left. But look, growing up, I had two heroes, the Beatles and Pierre Trudeau. So I became a liberal, as a young teenager, 13 or 14, because of Pierre Trudeau and what he meant to young people at the time. And I always, I thought originally I wanted to be an actor when I grew up, and then I started to think, well, maybe I should be a lawyer and go into politics one day and try to make the world a better place. And that's why I became a lawyer, and I became a litigation lawyer, and at a very young age, had some very high-profile cases. I started the whole Sunday shopping challenge, representing video stores and then bookstores, because in the day you couldn't be open on a Sunday if you sold books or sold rented video stores. So it was a huge constitutional challenge, and I was the only winner. The losers appealed to the Supreme Court, but the government decided to leave it alone. And then ultimately, the whole Retail Business Holidays Act, which governed being open on a Sunday or not being open on a Sunday, just crumbled. I then went on to have a lot of high-profile cases, and over the years, I was asked a few times to consider running for the Liberals, federally, actually, and never did it, thought about it, never did it. And when this looming next election was coming up here in Ontario, I started to see shades of Mike Harris with budget cuts to education and healthcare and those kind of things. And that was before the pandemic. I thought, maybe it's time. So that makes a long story very short, but that's why I'm running. I want to improve education. I want to make sure the educational system is fully funded with a vision for the future of what young people need, and it's very complicated.
Yeah, education is a very complicated issue.
Yeah. We've got to change. We've got to adapt. We've got to deal with with how the world is turned upside down, and kids need a very sound educational system. So that's very important to me.
Yeah, we've come a long way from bringing in the Catholic school system into the public purse, if you will, where, I grew up in that era where, my parents were given the option to direct their taxes to Catholic schools since we were Catholic. A lot has changed since then, and there's a few things that dovetail. Private schools are an option people have, and speak to the importance of them.
Yeah, well, private school is an option if you have the money to do it,
Absolutely.
and most people don't. And we've always had a good, sound, excellent public school system here in Ontario. Whether they were conservative leaders or liberals or even NDP, we had a good public school system. It varied depending on who led the government and what party led the government. But it's been underfunded without question. And the Ford government had plans to make substantial cuts before the pandemic, and that started the teacher strikes and rotating strikes and things like that. So you knew where we were headed, and there was talk of online learning before the pandemic. So what is to come with a new conservative government if they are elected? I hope they're not, but if they're elected, wait till you see the cuts that they will make on education and healthcare and other areas. It'll happen.
Yeah, and with the education system, the importance of, I think, extracurricular stuff, after school programs and such, they've taken a major hit. How do you feel about the complete picture of children going to school? If nothing's taught us, about the pandemic, teaching us more about education is how important children are in school, and even some of the other programs that kids need to be a part of.
Well, I mean, humans, including children, are social animals, and a child needs interaction, not on a screen. Children need less interaction on the screen than they have. So it's important. Eye contact, physicality, the ability to play and run and emote and all those kind of things are critically important. And anyone who has children or grandchildren or are observant know how much they've suffered during this pandemic. The inability to socialize, the ability to have sleepovers and play dates and run around in the park. And just think of, I have grandchildren who are very young. Just think of the impact on them at such an early age to be deprived of that physicality, the social contact. We're going to have to deal with the ramifications of that for many, many, many years.
Yeah, it's not just about education; it's about life experience as well. And you can learn social behaviors, but you need to practice them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can segue now because I honestly, Jerry, admire what you've done in your life, and one of the things that I enjoyed the most, that I was reading when I was reading about you, is your affinity with children's, movies, television, that kind of stuff, producing stuff for children. How much gratification and what put you into that sphere?
Having children. I have five kids. I've got four grandkids. And, from my first child, from my son Dan, I started making up stories and playing guitar, singing songs, doing silly things. That always made me fulfilled as a parent, and continued to fulfill me. And so I started producing children's music and CDs and live shows. So when you asked me what was my inspiration, having kids and wanting them to enjoy life.
Yeah, that's one of the healthy things, the imagination for children. I'm almost getting away from education, but it doesn't matter when it comes to children. Almost everything's in education. What benefits do you try to instill in children with what you produce? The purpose in your mind. What was your motivation leaving children with?
To love life, to love positive experiences, to have broad experiences. Hey, I grew up, I was obsessed with Superman and DC Comics, and then, watching in the earlier days of television and variety shows and musical acts and comedians, and then ultimately the Beatles came along, and that gave me a joy of life. not just a happiness in life, but a joy of life, the things you could do, and how important creativity is, how it can inspire you, it can make you happy, it can help you in times of trouble. So those are the things that I wanted to exude in my children, and my grandchildren, and for other kids. It's they're pure. Their minds are wide open, and rather than feed them toxicity and negativity and hate and all of those things, and so much of it. My preference is to expose them, inspire them to have a positive, happy, joyous life.
Can I corral and maybe direct people to something here that when it comes to children, we want our children to believe they can do anything. I heard of a child who was 14 years old, and he went to interview some guy named John Lennon. He was playing for the Plastic Ono band at the time, and previously he was with another band called the Beatles. You referred to them a little bit. How did that frame your thinking in life? That experience, a lot grew from those few minutes that you had with him, right? When you inversely speaking, the short time that you spent with him led to a lot of time after that, didn't it?
Yeah, well, just to give a context, when I was 14 in 1969, the Beatles were still together. They were towards the end of their career as a group. They were in the middle of recording Abbey Road, their last album, and there was a rumor that John and Yoko were spotted at the Toronto airport. That's all I needed to hear, being the Beatle freak that I was. And John was my favorite by far. And I went on a search the next morning, the Monday morning, to find my hero. And I found him at about 7 in the morning in the King Edward Hotel in Toronto. I was knocking on all kinds of doors until I found him. And he let me hang out with him for the day and into the evening, and let me interview him for 30 minutes. And that story unfolds to this day. So, when you're 14 and something like that happens, and you meet your hero, most of the times if you meet a hero, even if it's an uncle that you heard about, or a celebrity, it's usually a disappointment. But with John Lennon, it was incredible. He was kind. Yoko was generous with spirit and a nurturing kind of a way. And the world was breathing down their necks at the time. There were reporters lined up outside of his door, the suite at the Edward, and he thought it was more important to spend the time with this young kid. And I know subsequently Yoko told me, he just thought I was a fun, bright, brash kid. It was more important for him to talk to me one-on-one. Um, uh, Not as a star, but as a real person who cared, than doing interviews. Um, that spirit and that exposure I had to John Lennon, one of the greatest cultural figures of the 20th century, um, lingers to this day. It's part of who I am. That you can be so important to millions of people, and yet be a real person.
Yeah, you, I'm sorry, I, I I jumped on a pause, a pregnant pause. Go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
No, I could go on, but my story is quite, it's out there. Many years later, I produced a short animated film about that, using the audio interview between me and John, and was nominated for an Oscar and won an Emmy, and published a book. It's called I Met the Walrus. The film is called I Met the Walrus too, and ultimately connected with Yoko, and produced and directed a short animated film for her called Yoko Ono's My Hometown. That is bang on even to this day. And I had the unbelievable uh, privilege and luck uh, to connect with Sean Lennon son of John and Yoko, last year, and produced short animations from his father's Plastic Ono Band album and a couple of other songs to go on Spotify. So if you go on Spotify and you look at John Lennon Plastic Ono Band Ultimate Collection, and you listen to each of the songs on it, the first 13 songs on it, you'll see the little animations that we work on together. So I'm, from that meeting so many years ago in 1969 as a kid, I'm still, how should we put it, part of the John Lennon local family.
It was you and I are basically of the same era. I'm a little bit older than you, just a tad. I'm February or July.
Frank, you look like you're in your late 20s.
Yeah, right. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll pretend I believe that. The real issue is that with John Lennon, when you met him, you understood what his main priority was outside of his music, or at least it enveloped their music, because at that time Give Beasts a Chance was a big deal. And did you understand, and how did it affect you later on when you realized how much pressure he was under to actually still be that kind of person? He was being chased by the FBI, a lot of other different people. The American government did not like him. They wanted to ensure that they could quiet him down as much as possible. When you met him, and then in the ensuing years that followed, is it amazing how much he was not altered, relationship wise, and his ability to have a relationship with a young lad?
Yeah, amazing and incredible. And just pick a celebrity today and try to imagine that at the height of their fame, with everything swirling around them, that they would take the kind of time that he took. I can't think of one celebrity, good or bad, who would do anything close to him. But he was the real deal. He really was. And, nothing was bigger than the Beatles, and it's still true to this day. Children listen to their music. The music is still seen as an iconic manifestation of culture throughout the world. I mean, you mention the Beatles to anybody of any generation, and it has some resonating impact. He's just an incredible person, and I've got to say, Yoko was too, and still is. Not enamored with their own fame, and Sean, the son of these two iconic, visionary people, celebrated people, is just like them, real and sensitive, and kind, generous, and extraordinarily creative. His songs weren't just aberrations and fanciful things. The songs have meaning to this day because he was an incredible poet, a humanist, and a kind and generous soul.
Yeah, kind of ironic, because I guess if I were to define or give you an opinion, my opinion would be that John Lennon was the kind of man who used his not politics. Yeah, okay, we'll call it. His politics was up front, but it protected what I'm hearing is it protected the kind and generous person that he was with people and whatever, right?
Yeah.
Whereas today, the inverse might be true with, right? It's the opposite today. For most, I think that's the point you were trying to make as far as what made him special.
Yeah. I mean, and I know this because I experienced it, and my short animated film's 5 minutes. We edited it down my 30-minute interview in 5 minutes. But if you listen to the whole interview, you hear the superstar try to minimize his fame and his celebrity and express real concern to kids like me about about how violent the world was starting to get. So the Vietnam War was raging at the time. There were other wars going on, Biafra, Nigeria, and throughout the planet. Um, and kids, young people, were increasingly protesting uh, war and violence and the draft, and we didn't have a draft in Canada at the time, but the American stuff we did. And kids were starting to get hurt. Not long after I met John, 4 kids were shot in Kent State,
Ohio State, yep.
The National Guard, for protesting. So things are getting out of hand. And John was, throughout my interview, saying, like my first question was basically, what can we as the young people of Toronto do to help your campaign for peace? And he said, do anything for peace. You can go to school for peace, you don't go to school for peace, or whatever. As long as you do it for peace. If you run around, this is a quote from him, if you run around wild, you're going to get smacked. And that's what happens. And one day you kids are going to be the establishment, and it's good to have machines and buildings and all of that. And he was very consciously worried that all of his fans and the young people who listen to Beatle music and other music or whatever were the peace-loving 60s were starting to morph into the violent, drugged-out, apathetic 70s. And not long after, within days, he left Toronto, went to Montreal for the Bed In for Peace, where at that point anybody could get into his room. And at one point, it isn't a very well-known thing, but at one point somewhere in California, it might have been Berkeley University, there was a protest, and there was a sense that it was going to turn violent, and that the National Guard or whoever were going to come in, they were sitting in or whatever. And the organizers contacted John, somehow got through him, and asked if he could try to calm down the crowd. And I think there's a tape somewhere that exists where they hooked John up on the phone to thousands of kids in this campus in the U.S. And he was just talking them down. If you get violent, they're going to get violent. You're going to get hurt. You're not going to help your cause. Let's just be peaceful. Let's just be peaceful. And he calmed them down, and he saved lives. That's a fact. That's the kind of guy he is. And here I am seeking to be an MPP, in the next provincial election. I am not anywhere near, 0.001% of the kind of person John Lennon was. But he inspired me throughout my life to want to strive for good things.
I was going to make the connection myself, but you made it. Good job. I'll just sit here and listen.
Hey,
I was good. I was actually good because I want to know, because I know for myself, we've been told, people of our generation, we were told that, once you hit 30, life's over, because people over 30, right? And then John Lennon proved that not to be true when he turned 30, right? And people even asked him, how do you feel about that? Because he was one of those people that said you can't trust people over 30. And then he became one of the people over 30. Right. And opened up our minds and to people's minds that protests, hopefully the purpose of a protest is to, in my opinion, and is to say something and try to get it heard. But it doesn't have to be something you beat over someone's head. That point you made about the call from Montreal to speak to the protesters, that phone call had a lot to do with the fact that what they were fighting for was giving peace a chance, which he wrote a song about at that time. And it was important for him to pass the information in a political sense, that we all can make a difference. Now, with that in your mind, we're framing you almost, remember, gentlemen, ladies watching this, he was a lawyer as well. So there was a practical legal side of upbringing for you that you come to the Ontario Liberal Party with. But this sense of fairness, equity, and compassion, is not something politicians are known a lot about, And in fact, I read one quote where I think, I don't know whether it was you or attributed to the fact that too many politicians are lawyers. Maybe it's better less are, but you're adding to that number. How do you justify that?
Well, it's actually an old statistic. I don't know what the latest statistics are, but I suspect there are far fewer lawyers now running politics than before. So you have no matter what party. I suspect the Conservative Party is filled with lawyers and wealthy people, but the Liberal, I can speak for the Ontario Liberal Party. We're all friends. We all work together. We collaborate. We socialize, and that includes Stephen Del Duca, our leader. The candidates for this upcoming election are extraordinarily diverse, both in terms of the cultural background, where they come from, where the parents come from, what their livelihoods are. So we have people in the medical profession, not just doctors running, but nurses, healthcare practitioners, environmentalists, teachers. They're all over the place. Economists, cultural figures, artists, that kind of thing. So, that's an old story that it's just filled with lawyers. If you go conservative, you know basically what you're going to get. But this Liberal Party of Ontario, I think, is the most diverse, inclusive group of candidates. I'm not just saying it because I'm running. It's true. And the facts will bear it out. And you can check it out. It's the most diverse and inclusive group of candidates in the history of this province, that's for sure.
Let me ask you about, you raised the issue of healthcare and stuff like that. You mentioned a provincial premier and Premier Harris, who was, had his tagline was "Common Sense Revolution." Was defined for us common sense, and if cutting healthcare was something that you considered common sense, that was damage done in his era that to this day we felt, and really it underwrote the biggest problem we have with our healthcare system in dealing with the pandemic. We were already at 87% capacity, so it didn't take much. And I'm not minimizing, please, no one out there, I'm not minimizing the pandemic. I'm just saying that we had a pretty blunt instrument when the pandemic happened. What do you see looking ahead, how we could help our healthcare system to be more, be able to pivot when it comes to not just the pandemic, but extreme accidents, that kind of stuff?
Well, like you say, Frank, there were cuts. Our healthcare system wasn't in great shape over the years. We remember the cuts in the Harris years. The important thing is you have to, as a government, you have to look at your limited resources and what the priorities are. So the government sets the priorities. Now, this government, the Ford government, we know what their priorities are. So building $1 billion worth of highways that aren't necessarily helpful, that aren't great for the environment, that are in areas that are not necessary. If you build a highway that will take 10, 12 years to build, and you spend $10 billion, $8, $9, $10 billion on it, imagine what $10 billion would do for our healthcare system, for our long-term care facilities, for our schools. That's just one example of priorities that are skewed. It's definitely not my priority. If you're going to build highways for gas guzzling cars and not support electric cars and greener industries and products and all of that, then this world there's enough problems. This world is not going to be a great place to hang out. and raise your kids. So that's what a government has to do. And in election time, that's the kind of choice that an elector has. You know, you might be unhappy with the NDP, you might be unhappy with the Liberals or the Conservatives or whatever, but the choice is, who do you think is in the best position to do the things that are closely aligned to your own priorities? So if your priorities are a healthcare system that is viable and properly funded, not just for today, like you say, not just for an emergency where you have to scramble and people's lives are at stake, but that think about the future, or an educational system that thinks about not just what kids need today in an emergency, how do you set up online learning and all those kind of things, but what are the tools that children will need for this ever-changing world for the future? That's not a priority. If it's not a priority to get proper daycare, $10 a day daycare, so that parents, particularly women, are able to go into the workforce to sustain their families and nurture their own existence. If you're not prepared to do that, is that the kind of government or politician that you want to vote for? That's why I got into this race. It's not who I am. It's not the priorities I see. And now in this post-pandemic world, we have to really make careful choices because lives are at stake. And I'm not just talking about illness, future children, future planets, and they're important choices to make. And I'm not going to vote conservative.
Well, well, let me remind people who are with
I won't vote NDP either, but I definitely won't vote in a way that would bring Ford and his creed down.
We're with Jerry Levitan. He is running with the Ontario Liberal Party, attempting to get elected in the Davenport riding. So let me see if I understand what you're saying. So what you're saying is problem solving. Let's see. I think I got that. I'm going to review it. And then we've got, as far as healthcare is concerned, with a good healthcare system, it is an economic plus if you have a good healthcare system because it keeps the system going. A good education system brings us smarter, more intelligent, more efficient, and effective young people who can contribute to the tax base because they're well educated and able to compete in the world. Seems to make sense. Why is that so hard to sell sometimes? I wonder, you know, is it the self quick gratification world that we live in today that people can't see past their nose? You know, I mean, long term plans, if they're thought out well, like a really good education. All kidding aside, I was being a little facetious and a little silly, but I'm trying to make the point very slowly. Good education leads to good, intelligent people. And if they're healthy, it improves them as well. So health and education for our young children turn great adults out, right? Isn't that what the motivation is in your
Well, sure. You know how I see it, Frank? I'm with you. So the way I see it is the world has become so complicated. Um, uh, and so stressful, even for children. And so everyone's tuned to the technological apparatus that they use, and kids, TikTok, iPads, whatever that the screen time that kids go through is so extraordinarily uh, you know unhealthy for them or whatever. But then, particularly in the pandemic, just something to do. But anyways, people are so focused on all the urgent things that are happening. Right now, look what's going on, in Ukraine, and everybody knows. You don't have to be historians to know this is going to impact everybody, and the potential for wider conflict and all those things. are scared. People are concentrating on their day-to-day needs and requirements and those of the family and the kids. They're worried about the future for their children, for themselves. They don't really have time, leisure time, to really listen to too much of what politicians have to say. And it's a big problem. And sometimes people vote without trying to be partisan here. Sometimes people vote because of their immediate needs and worries. So if they think someone's going to raise taxes when they can barely, pay the taxes that they're paying at the present time, that will affect who they vote for. If people worried about, food on the table, that will affect who they vote for. So, I'm not really critical about people who vote for a party or a politician who don't necessarily share my view. But you're right. If we're to succeed as a society, and if our children are going to be able to progress as they get older, we need some very viable things. We need housing affordability. And I'm not just talking about new houses. That includes rental accommodation, co-ops, and whatever. We've got to deal with it in a responsible way, not just for affluent people or people with secure positions, but for everybody. Otherwise, what we've seen about homelessness in the past couple of years, people taking apart, that's going to be nothing compared to what we're going to have to do. So, like you say, kids have to be given the tools to survive in an ever more complicated and dangerous world, and we have to support them, and we have to have the infrastructure to take care of people who get sick, people who get older and need support, and an economy that has the ability to grow and to encompass all kinds of varying people, because all bets are off. You hear things like about the gig economy. More and more people are working for themselves, either because they have to, or because that's the kind of area they've gone into. So we've got to deal with all these dramatic changes. I know I'm going on and on, but there was a book, I'm sure you remember it, in the 60s. It's Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. And the basic premise of that book was, as technology and the world gets more and more complicated, increasingly people will have difficulty dealing with change. Hence, future shock. That was, like in the 60s, that was nothing compared to what's going on now. The day-to-day dramatic upheavals, technologically, health-wise, vocationally, the economy, globally, it's just, how do you keep up with it? So, breaking news, people tend to focus on how am I going to pay my property tax, how am I going to pay my rent. Oh man, prices for food is now double to get fruits and vegetables. So I want to do my small part to make things better. I'm thinking of my kids and my grandkids. And if you elect a government that does poorly and doesn't take care of your interests and doesn't have priorities such as a greener planet, a healthier planet, proper funding for healthcare and schools, and an economy that is there for everybody, not just for the wealthy. Things are not, the perspective of the future is not good. So I want to do my part to convince people in Davenport that the Liberals are the right choice. They're the best choice to defeat Doug Ford and Conservatives, and I want to be elected. And I want to add this thing too. The leader of the Ontario Liberals, Stephen Del Duca, is really an extraordinary man. You know, we have regular, all the candidates have regular sessions with him. We're all involved in policy discussions and all the rest of it. He's a thoughtful man. He's a fair man, uh, and he thinks about the future. He's a father of two young kids, and that's where his priorities lie too. So, if I was in a party that had a leader that didn't consult the candidates and wasn't thoughtful and didn't take strong decisions so the right position could be taken, I wouldn't be happy and I wouldn't be running. But he does those things. He thinks about things, he listens to experts, and he takes a stand. And I'll give you just one example. Early in the discussion about vaccination, so going back into the summer, the Liberals, Stephen Davenport was the first leader uh, to call for mandatory vaccinations for frontline education and healthcare workers. And had we followed that course when the pandemic was thriving in the summer, we would have saved a lot of trouble, a lot of lockdowns. Kids would have probably been able to go to school and not have to spend so much online learning. The healthcare system wouldn't have been overloaded. That was a tough decision to make. That was a tough stand to make for a political leader. But he made it because it was the right decision. That's the kind of leader he is. And we would be far better off, in my opinion. And that's why I'm doing this thing, running for office the first time in my life. We'd be better off with a government that listens, thinks, considers the evidence and facts, real facts, and makes decisions for the betterment of everyone.
Well, for the most part, really, the definition of politicians should have more the shepherd. But unfortunately, sometimes the shepherd has trouble getting everybody in the same herd, right? You can't get everybody in the same place. Another thing that politicians have to do is be as predictive of the future as they possibly can, whether it be immediate or long term. What do you see as some of the immediate concerns? And then we can talk about some of the long-term concerns. You know, I intentionally based a lot of what we talked about till now on children because of your background. You know, we've talked about healthcare, education, and you got into homes, affordable housing, because those are three things that children need a lot. So I guess what I'm asking now is about children and their future. You know, future employment. What do you see as the responsibility of the Liberal Party of Ontario, since they are one of their main things is education?
Well, the schools have to be properly funded. That's huge priority. There has to be daycare um, for parents who have to work and can't just stay home and take care of their kids. It's an important priority, not just for their welfare, but the welfare of the economy. If more people can go out and work um, and have a career or make money, that put food on the table or whatever, all of us will benefit. So, school system has to be properly funded. The healthcare system has to be properly funded.
What about the direction of it? I know where you stand on that. It's laudable. You know that the school system should be able to withstand itself. But in what direction? How do you see employment for the young and for people now? How can education help? Are there any twists that we're not aware of that education, for example, community colleges? Some people figure, that was a big thing in the past few years where people have realized maybe we should have more community colleges because we lack those kinds of employees, workers.
Yeah. I mean, in this economy that is going through upheaval, clearly we need as many educational opportunities as possible. The days of thinking that university is the best route, are over. There are people in university now, students in university now, who regret going. There are people in community colleges who regret not going to university. So we have to have as many opportunities as possible, and not everyone has to go to university or college. There are other routes to take. You can start working. I know one of my best friends, his son, got scholarships to go to about 6 universities. He's interested in film, and he was offered a job because he had worked part time in this production company, and that's where he went. His father was a little concerned because he wasn't going to university, but he's making good money. He's been doing it during the pandemic, starting the pandemic. He loves it. He's gained experience. So any opportunity, we shouldn't look down on any path for a young person that gets to where they want to be or fulfills them, helps them lead a productive life. So, sure, colleges, trade schools, university, whatever it is, and the government should be providing those resources and should make it easier for families and kids to go into these places. I mean, we have to look at tuitions and support for families that can afford these things. So the days of going to spending a fortune to go to university, we have to examine all those things because kids have to have the opportunities and the tools. So I think I've answered your question, but I'm all in favor of any measure that gives students options.
Yeah, and then that speaks to we've talked about children from the parents' perspective. Then there's grandparents. How do you feel about the way the retirement world goes? Long-term homes, those kinds of things have really been put under the microscope, and the Conservatives haven't exactly shone in that regard. What do you see? What kind of reset do you see? Because you're running in politics. We're hoping, fingers crossed, post-pandemic, right? How do you see coming out of the gate, and how you can help to? I mean, jobs are not hard to find post-pandemic, but how do you see matching people to jobs and looking into the future, retirement and how that works, the transition part for people?
Well, I mean, it's a heck of a question. I mean, some people are fortunate, and when they get older and they're ready for retirement, they don't have to work. Um, so that's a great position to be in. Um, if they have to go into long-term care facility or something like that, I mean, let's think back at the beginning of this pandemic. That was the first shocking thing we were dealing with. How the pandemic was just on fire in these places, and they weren't prepared. And private industry to a large extent is involved there. So clearly, the government has to rethink the long-term care facilities, so that at the very least we have minimum of proper care for seniors that are in these facilities, whether they are expensive private facilities or places where people have no choice. I'm doing a lot of door knocking, I'm doing a lot of phone calls, and then you people I speak to are seniors. And there are seniors who I've spoken to who own their own homes. They're retired, but they can't pay their property tax. The property tax is going up. The utility bills are going up. So that can't last forever. So how a senior is supposed to deal with a situation where food prices are going up, energy costs are going up, living wherever they are, whether it's a rental facility or a private care facility or their own home, we have to rethink it. So I think that answers to some extent your question about retirement, because people can't afford where they live. And
there it is.
There it is.
That's the issue. That's the issue that I have as a retired person. where I was forced to move out of Toronto because I couldn't afford to retire in Toronto.
Right.
And you talked about affordable housing, because affordable housing is for the upwardly mobile, the people starting out, but it also, I don't think people pay enough attention that also seniors need, between the time they go into a senior's home, right? Retirement and a senior's home, people are not going into senior homes. I have a mother who's 94 years old.
Well,
She's not in a senior's home yet. She's not in a senior's home yet. She's living with my sister, so she has that opportunity. But seniors who don't have family to go to, how do they downsize? Where do they downsize? How can they afford to live? I think that's I wanted you touched on that. Expand on that for us.
well, we have to examine what is it that we could do for seniors. I mean, something more than just getting a discount at a drugstore on Wednesdays or whatever. We have to.
Thursday, but that's okay. I benefit from it every week. Go
Well,
ahead.
I didn't want to mention the place, but um, then there's another perspective on that. Let's look at seniors who own their own homes and they're retired, and there are many of them. Younger people, and I'm part of the housing sub policy group in the Ontario Liberal Party, trying to look at these things and speaking to various groups. Younger people who are trying to get a house, whether they're couples or singles or whatever, their perspective is, look at all these seniors who own their own homes in these areas, and they're not moving, and they're pushing prices up, and we will never get to own a home in an area where we can have kids, raise kids. That is a huge other side of the coin. So sure, we've got to protect our seniors and have a system, healthcare and economic, that sustains them and allows them to carry on their golden years. But we also have to recognize that there are people who are looking for housing affordability, rental or buying houses or whatever, that can't go into so many neighborhoods. And just talking about Toronto, like the prices for houses are through the roof and are inaccessible to so many younger people who want to have kids or just live a comfortable life in a nice area near a park or near facilities or whatever. So we have to look at all of it, and I'm immersed in that now because of the sub policy group. And we're going to be coming out within a week or so with our policy on housing.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the transition. We live in a world where we talked about children, and of course, children need a roof over their head, a good education, uh, you know, uh, eat well, have enough food, live in a safe environment, whether it be within the home, outside the home. And as that talks to parents, because parents do most of what they do, like you said, the sacrifices that you made, and the desire you had to get involved in children's stuff was because you loved your children and you wanted to do something for your kids. So parents want to do that. We've talked about elderly being able to make the transition economically and still have a roof in their head on their head, and the independence. All these things make us happier people, right? And how important, because you're a guy who's grabbed life in many. You've won you were up for an Academy Award. You won an Emmy. You like to play music. You like to make movies. You're a lawyer. All these things, before we go, because I want in these last couple of minutes, the word diversity is very important today, but you have a diversity of understanding of what you do in life. How important is it to make room for a diverse group of people, whether it be culture or whatever? Define that for us. How important is diversity?
I think it's the most important thing, and if you think about all the changes we have to make as in the post-pandemic world, are we just going to build condos? Are we going to just get rid of green space like the conservatives have done? Are we going to just have all these towers and highways that cost billions of dollars? What kind of life is that? I don't know if you've seen The Matrix, but that's not
Yep.
the world I want to live in, where everybody has their pods, you know, and tubes are just sustaining them. Um, uh, we need green space. We need community space. We need, if we're going to house people in more increasingly efficient in terms of space and cost units, um, there should be space for the full community, cultural activities, artists, um, places where people can gather. The city of Toronto, so many iconic buildings have gone, some of which were owned by various governments. Theaters, music venues, where people go to have a good time, to sort of suspend their disbelief in troubled times. It's a great question to end this on, Frank, because we're going to need to think about the quality of our lives. Otherwise, it's going to be a dark place. It's pretty dark in some places now. So we have to support artists. We have to support cultural events. We have to have parks and nurture our green spaces and all those things. And we haven't even talked about the existential crisis of our times, which is climate change. And it's sort of off the shelf because of what we've been facing. So those are the things, the quality of our lives to sustain us, to uplift us, for me, is a high priority.
Yeah, take a look at a tough decision. This is the one that I've been wrestling with where, the Biden administration removed the pipeline, and you talk about, they removed the pipeline and all for good reason, right? But now we end up with a situation where we're buying oil or countries are buying oil from countries that we wish we hadn't been buying oil from. And now you're going to have that pressure as a politician uh, to think less about tomorrow's green issues um, as opposed to today's other green issues.
Right.
If you
Well,
follow what I'm saying.
I no, I do, but all I can tell you is the kind of person I know I am. And sure, if I'm lucky enough to be elected, I'm going to have to make compromises here and there, like you have to do in everything in life. But I'm not going to compromise my kids and grandkids' future. And without question, we have to set our priorities as to what is in the best interest of ourselves and our planet, not short-term, uh, you know, gifts like the Tory government is spitting out right now. That's just going to be the way things have to go, uh, and that's going to be important. So, if there's a choice between pollution and non-pollution, I'm going to go in the non-pollution direction.
Yeah, it's a tough sell. In the best of times, it's going to be even tougher now because of circumstances as they sit. Economic concerns. We all know that because of what's going on in Ukraine in Ukraine, there's
Well,
going to be a lot of
yeah, yeah, you're dead on, Frank. And look, as the filmmaker part of me, and um, you know, I'm a student of science fiction movies and horror movies and all those kind of things. As a kid, I used to love it. But movies like the apocalyptic films, like The Day After Tomorrow, and all these films that would show disasters. They look like mild documentaries now compared to what's going on. So the future is here, and we've got to deal with things dramatically. And I know I'm a politician, and I know I'm a liberal, but I got to say, our policies, we come up with them every other day, and the choices are for a greener Ontario, and for sustainable industries and support for sustainable industries and communities. That's where we are, and I'm proud to be there. So tough decisions have to be made. You know, if you don't want tough decisions to be made, don't vote for me.
Well, I have to make a movie reference now, just in honor of your being here. And so I guess what you're saying is you don't agree with "Don't Look Up." I think is the message I'm getting.
Hey, Frank, at our age, you sort of you don't want to look up because you know what's there, right? But
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
gotta keep our eyes open and look up and understand that we're in it together. Because if we don't get that right, we're going to perish together. We've got to focus on our common interests and the interests of our kids, and that's how I see it.
Mr. Jerry Levitan, it was a pleasure getting to know you.
Same here, Frank.
It was a very deep pleasure. And I got to tell you, say hi to your brother for me. I doubt he'll remember who I am, but that's okay.
Hey, no, he's got a good memory.
It's me that doesn't have a good memory. Thank you for being here, sir. I really appreciate it. Running for as an Ontario Liberal in the future Ontario election, and for the riding in Davenport. He is Jerry Levitan. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for watching. My name's Candid Frank, and we look forward to having you on again. This show airs Fridays at 4 p.m. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For this show, news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out spanglishworld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next Friday.